This week, here on our main segment on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to look at making tactical maps. I
Mm.
would like to thank one of our listeners out there, Shu King Tan, who says another suggested topic for the podcast. If there is room, what makes a good tactical map?
Mm.
Advice on drawing maps that clearly identify key elements and communicate a story, encounter flow, or framework.
Love it. I love this
It
question,
is
Shawn, and I will
such, yeah.
I'll cut you off and say I love this question because often with newer map artists, I see maps that they're selling, right? Like here is I don't know, the docks or something. And I look at it and I go, this isn't a great map for miniature play.
Mhm.
And I think it's good to, and then also similarly, a lot of times people who aren't artists, and I am not an artist, are asked as part of a design process, hey, create that map that the artist should, give me the sketch of what the artist should create. And so I go and in very bad drawing skills show something, or I build it out of Dwarven Forge or whatever, and I have to provide it. And if you are not familiar with miniatures play or haven't thought through this a lot, it's very easy to turn in a bad map. So I think this is an important
This
topic.
is it is an important topic. And to be clear, remember, we're talking about tactical maps here. So we're talking about maps that you would lay down on the table, put those beautiful not Dwarven Forge, well, make it out of Dwarven Forge or use those beautiful WizKids
WizKids,
minis.
Baldur's Gate 3 minis.
Yeah. Yeah. Put them on there with the monsters and be able to run a really fun encounter
Yeah.
with that location put into map form.
Yes.
And so this was one of the hardest things that I had to
Mm.
learn when I started designing back in third edition because I never played with tactical maps or minis in any of the previous editions. We would sometimes put dice out on the table to show
Mhm.
relative positioning,
Mhm.
but never to the degree of where we weren't measuring in inches to see how far away we were
Yeah.
or what the range of that spell was. We just sort of eyeballed it and called it good, and we were very happy to do that. When third edition came out and became a much more tactical game, this became super important. And I I went through many a ream of graph paper, trying and retrying and failing and retrying to get a map that would actually be usable, learning
Yeah.
many lessons along the way.
It is really hard. If you've run organized play for third, fourth edition, and also fifth, but especially third and fourth, you have undoubtedly run an encounter that was supposed to be the thrilling, awesome boss battle. And you realize, oh, this is a real problem. And then the next time
Yeah.
you run it, you might just kind of shortcut the map or fold a bit under because you
Right.
realize this is such a problem. Or
Or
things that are
expand
funny.
it.
Yeah, or expand it.
Yeah.
And there are hilarious things. Like I remember in third edition, there was an adventure that had the gargantuan monster, but there's only one 5 foot passageway leading into the room with
Yeah. Yep.
it. So this logic things like that also can ruin the
Yeah.
experience. It's not just the things, but well, yeah, we'll talk about this.
Yeah. Well, we will talk about every single bit of that. So I just threw down a list of some things to talk about. I'm sure Teos, you have a bunch of
Mhm.
things that you want to talk about, but I want to really start at the most basic level, which is invest in graph paper
Mhm.
and pencils.
Mhm.
Mechanical pencils may be best if you
Mhm.
can get to really thin
Ice
lead
fine, yeah.
because you need to be able to make very small markings in these very small grids. Colored pencils also work
Yeah.
fairly well if you need to differentiate certain things like elevation or
Mhm.
different kinds of trappings in on your map.
Yeah.
Some of the things that make up the setting there.
Though I will say, Sean, color is an interesting part of this because, like with organized play, a lot of times your DMs will print out in black
Mhm.
and white. Or if you're a
Sure.
home DM, like I only have a black and white printer. If I want color, I've got to go somewhere else. And so if I'm ever making my own map, and
Yeah.
everything we're going to talk about, we'll look at both home play and other
Yeah.
types of play, but or if you're designing or whatever. But yeah, that color aspect is something that's awesome when you know people have color. Like if you think they'll mainly print it
Right.
online, or if they're going to be running it out of the book, great. But if you think folks like at a convention, a lot of times is the
Yeah.
case. A lot of DMs might just be printing black and white. You will
Mhm.
lose that, or if there's
Yeah.
shading that's subtle, you'll just
For
lose
sure.
that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
When I say color pencils, I mean for your own
Design, yeah,
understanding of
yeah,
things. Once you're ready to publish it, color becomes problematic for all the reasons Teo said, not to
yeah,
mention any sort of
yeah.
color blindness. Uh, so get the tools in order to be able to draw this. And I am better drawing freehand than trying to use any tools, but there are a ton of great mapping tools out there
Yeah,
as well.
true.
So I don't know any off the top of my head, but I've been using them. So, uh, keep those things in mind. But let's just talk about the design portion for now.
Mhm.
Talk about you have some great battles in mind.
Yeah.
You are designing these, and now you need to put a place for these adventures, these encounters to take place. The first thing that I try to do is I try to just close my eyes and envision
Mm.
the battle, the encounters that are going to take place there. If I were making a movie of this,
Mhm.
what would I want the viewers, the audience to be able to see? That
Yeah,
can help at least get a frame of reference, a scope, and the grander details of what you want to put into this map from your encounter.
absolutely. I love it. Though I will note that I have found that I have an ability, I think you kind of have this too, of really visualizing things in 3 dimensions. I mean, I can almost like one of those, like, like they like to show off like virtual reality or whatever by moving the camera around. I can just
Yeah.
think like that and visualize spaces. There are
Mhm.
people who can't, and so you will need to use other techniques for that. And I don't know if imagining scenes from a movie are helpful. Like when you think sacrifice, you can think of, I don't know, you can think of Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom or any number. Does that help? And maybe even watching it may help to think through the layout, right? But that ability to think of it cinematically is
Mhm.
really helpful, because what it does is highlight the kind of interesting pieces that you're going to want to
Mhm.
add to this map, right? The raised altar, the dais, the swinging candelabra, the pit in front, the chain mechanism in the winch, right? All those Temple of Doom type things you could put in there.
Right.
And that becomes really helpful whether you're making sketches immediately or writing a bullet list on a piece of paper of like your ideas. You start coming up with these concepts that can be there, right? The braziers that are
Mhm.
lit in eldritch, green flame.
Mhm. Great flame. I also want to add here that my mind and Teos's mind obviously went to like dungeons,
Mm,
but maps are more than just dungeons, right? They
yes.
could be taverns, they could be temples, they
Yeah.
could be the inside of a hotel room, they could
Hmm.
be a grand ballroom at a castle, they could be anything. So
True.
getting when I talk about envisioning this, I'm not even talking about like the 3D model because I'm actually terrible at that.
Yeah.
Uh, but what I'm doing is just trying to get the flavor of everything that's going to be in the room or the cavern or the chamber and what's going to happen in this space.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we're generally thinking about that kind of tactical mini type situation, even if you're running theater of the
mhm,
mind, sort of. But that's kind of the analysis of it. But
mhm,
tactical maps can also be in games that are very different. So, like, I'm holding up an Aliens Chariot of the Gods adventure, and if we look at that um,
mhm,
map that's in there, you were never meant to put down minis on this, right?
right.
It's the point of this is tactics around the player that says, I'm going to try to go to that armory or to the
Mhm,
comms station, or I need to get to the air scrubbers and clean them. And
mhm,
that tactical decision of, well, now I have to go down a level and I've got to go past that med lab that was so creepy when we saw it before. I hope that thing's
Mhm.
still locked inside there, right? Those kinds
Right.
of become an entirely different tactical decision,
Mhm.
but is still tactical. And so in designing that,
Yep.
you're asking yourself questions like, how do I create these neat moments? Like, there isn't just the science lab. You've got
Mhm.
the science lab, the med lab, and the obvious places you must go to and the conflict points so that it becomes this great story. Because you know that
Yep.
when you go to the air scrubber, something's in that shaft, Shawn.
Yep, yep. And that leads to my second point really well, which is once you've envisioned your map for a single encounter, make sure it fits
Mm,
into your overall setting. So, you can think at the bottom of this dungeon there is this dragon's lair and it's huge and it's all that. But if you are working in within a scale of a mountain and you only have so much room, you want to make sure you think, oh wait, I also need seven other rooms down here and they need to lead to this layer in a
mhm.
certain way. So make sure that that individual tactical battle map fits into your overall setting.
Yeah.
Is it part of a larger dungeon? How does it fit together? How does it help tell the story of the world and the characters by the position of it in the town,
Yeah.
right? In the castle. All of those things need to be aware of before you start because otherwise you will finish this beautiful map and then realize you need to change it because of the placement of the rest of the map, the rest of the setting, the rest of the world around it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's worth asking questions. This is very true of outdoor settings, right? If you want a bog
Mhm.
fight, but you're in the mountains, sure, there can be an area where water collects,
Mhm.
and you could explain it. And that's one thing you can do is explain why. But
Mhm.
maybe you should be doing something that's just mountainous to begin with, right?
Right.
Because maybe we're forcing a thing because of our initial creative endeavor when we might be better off, with rock slides and other things rather than a boggy area that's in between these two mountains. We can explain it, but it may be better to dig into the explanation of where we are in the world and more verisimilitude that way.
Mhm. So we've got envision that location for the battle or the encounter taking place. Make sure that your individual map fits with the larger setting. The next is make sure that the characters and NPCs or creatures will fit on this map. And when I say fit, I mean, yes, physically, but I also mean fit like ecologically and in terms of the story that's going on. And Teos is holding up a map of.
This is the cackling chasm from Rime of the Frost Maiden, which has an area with knolls. You and I covered this extensively, but it's one that a lot of folks turn to because the knolls barely fit in these rooms.
Mhm.
When you add characters,
Yeah.
then we have a problem. People don't actually fit. And so, as gorgeous as that map is and as interesting, it has this problem, right, where it
Mhm.
doesn't really hold the inhabitants well, and definitely does not allow for tactics because nobody can move around. This
Right.
same problem happens a lot of times in sort of maps by newer creators,
Mhm.
where they will do something like say, like, "Hey, here is a pier and a building," and you just get like one square of the building, and the first thing a character does is go, "Okay, I'm going to duck behind this building," so you're off the map.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
I'm going to go on to another to the left here. What's over there? And I don't know. This is a tiny map.
Mhm.
And a lot of
Yeah.
maps, if you zoom in, will you can see how bad that experience will be. In terms of the problems of where you would fit into the map.
Yeah. And so, fitting the characters. And what one thing I hear a lot of is someone will say, "Well, I made the room small because I wanted this to be a really interesting tactical combat where people only have so much room to move and you might need to like ready in action to move and go in a different where yeah, Teos
Yeah.
was holding up some examples of those things.
Yeah, this
And
is this is a mine shaft. It's exactly what you're saying, where the concept is, hey, these tight corridors in this mine, and this is one of the ones that's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, right? But the problem is you just can't have a great play experience in it. And so, as much as it may,
Yeah.
yes, it's this claustrophobic tunnel, what kind of battle can you have in this? It
Yeah.
becomes really hard.
Yeah. Having one battle like that might
Hmm.
be interesting, often frustrating, might be interesting, but as soon as you get beyond the one time, you're definitely losing players to we just have to keep doing the same thing over and over
Yeah.
again in order to have a battle in here.
Right.
And we want to use our full range of abilities and powers and movement. Uh, and so give give a way to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's one way of making characters fit. The other
Hmm.
way of making characters fit or creatures fit is what is their ecology? What is their what is their interaction with
Yeah.
their environment? Uh, and you can take it too far. Some people get to the point where they are worried about where the bar guest in its lair is getting their food and
Sure.
you know relieving themselves and
Yeah.
all of these things. So if you're super realistic and you want to go to that detail, okay, that's okay,
Hmm.
but it's not necessarily important. But again, you do want there to be logically a way for a creature to get in and out of their lair.
Right. Right.
You, yeah, you want there to be uh, like traps, putting traps into a place where the creature would constantly be walking over their own traps. Yes, you
Hmm.
can say they
Hmm.
know it's there, so they go around it. But if it's only a 5 foot tunnel and they're constantly having to tiptoe around this very deadly trap when they could just as easily slip and trigger it, becomes
Yeah.
something that you want to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Things come to mind like burrowing creatures, especially creatures that have special movement, apes that can
Yeah.
swing from the trees. It's becomes really realistic and can be very fun. You just want to be a little careful not to overdo it to where they're so capable that nobody can ever attack them, or
Mhm.
only down to readied actions. But playing off of that and showing, yeah, this is an encounter with giant apes. Hey, they've got boulders to throw and they've got vines they can swing on. That makes it very fun as long as you don't go too far.
Yeah. And what Teos is talking about now is getting into my tip number 4 here, which is think in terms of movement and abilities.
Mm.
So most characters will be able to move 30 feet. So if you put an encounter where the characters are going to start 25 feet away, everyone is always going to be able to move up to the monster, or the monster will be moved up to the characters, and that's a-okay.
Yeah.
If you want to get a little bit of difference there, have the encounter start 50 feet away. Now you are giving some tactical
Hmm.
maneuvering to the characters where the wizard can stand back and shoot their 60 feet, 120 feet spells safely. Whereas then the other characters will have to move. And you so think about it in terms of that to give a different feel to the encounter, while also thinking about it in terms of the monsters that you're putting in,
Yeah.
where you can give them a slight advantage or give them a slight disadvantage that can be overcome, or something like that. So try to vary it, but at least keep it in mind, be cognizant of it as you decide where the door or the entrance to the chamber is going to be in relation to where the monster is actually in a nest.
Yeah. So two thoughts on this. One is character roles or how they attack, right? Think about
Mhm,
an encounter from the perspective of I'm an AoE wizard. I'm going to drop
mhm,
big bursts, fireballs, and flaming hands and all this kind of stuff. Like, how is that going to all play out in here? And
mhm,
is that good or bad? And the answer can be either, but just be cognizant of it because you don't want too much of one or the other. I'm an
mhm,
archer. So can I just walk into the room and just park here and I don't need to move around at all? And
mhm,
then meanwhile, is my melee counterpart having to spend 2 rounds moving to get to the top of the ziggurat while the archer is just attacking every single round? That can be okay sometimes, but you want to be
mhm.
cognizant of this is what you're doing, right? A
Mhm.
very common thing to do is, what is the rogue going to do? And if the answer is just sit back there at range, okay, but what if they have something to do, right? Or somebody
Mhm.
has to get in there. And a lot of times the ranged characters will come into the room and be more engaged with it because there are these various things to do, whether it's a lever, a person to stop, an item to
Mhm.
empower, whatever it is. This creates a more dynamic and tactical environment because there are things drawing you in. And I like to think about movement both in the same way that I cinematically move around the room and envision it. I also
Right.
think about over the course of the combat, where do I expect people to move? What are these pathways that they're likely to take?
Yep.
And to encourage them to be moving, right? I want constant movement. I want it to be fluid. So there should be reasons why you want, goals of why you're here, combat advantages, all this that creates a sense of movement within that room.
Mhm.
I'm on this topic. The excellent Where Evil Lives by MCDM has a map that it's probably a little hard to see here, but it's a library. And this library is, it's got all these stacks of books, which is very realistic.
Mhm.
And those stacks of books are great for explaining that this is a library, but what it means is you will never fight in there, right?
Mhm.
This doesn't
Right.
hide you really from anything. It bottlenecks you. So
Mhm.
the vast majority of this map is an area you don't want to fight. And the top
Mhm.
floor actually has a view down on the level below. So you're not fighting there either. So you're going to fight your foes right by this one desk. This is a
Mhm.
really gorgeous map to just fight by a desk.
Yeah.
Had these
Yeah.
shells been moved in from the walls, you could have moved
Mhm.
around them. If there were a bunch
Yeah.
of small shelves, that would have been an interesting hide and seek kind of thing. And in fact, this is an
Mhm.
encounter with assassins, so it would have been, I think, even better. Someone may know this encounter better than I and say that I'm wrong about that. More important than this exact encounter is just that general concept, right, of thinking through what are you doing with the art and the space, and you want to use
Mhm.
all of it.
Yeah.
And how will the encounter enable you to use all of it? And we've talked about things like this before. You could have teleporters, you could have ways that you get quickly to other parts of the room, things that draw you there,
Mhm.
but that creates that tactical sense and
Yeah.
utility for both friends and foes.
Yeah. I love this library thing. I love combats and libraries when books are flammable.
Yeah.
I
Or
love
you can
this
throw the
when the
shelves.
shelves are in a place that will naturally draw hidey
Hmm.
ranged characters to hide behind a shelf, but then make the shelf easy to or able to be pushed over onto someone,
Yeah.
uh, making it a more dynamic map, a more dynamic encounter,
Yeah.
is one of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, and I've got another one here that I'll show, which is this is like a postcard talking about this map. This is by Maps of Mystery. I like their maps a lot, and it's a little bit fuzzy, but what I'm showing there is it's a river that kind of goes through the center of the area, and there is a log crossing on one part. And this is a map I use a lot for outdoor locations because I can easily add a thing or two to this and make it super interesting. There is cover.
Mhm.
There is this river that can be fast flowing, or it could be a drop down to it, or whatever. There's this log crossing. You can put more logs pretty easily or 3D terrain onto it. Super fun. And what it also does very well is there are interesting things in the heart of it to draw characters to it, and you can easily add things to it, right? A statue, idol, whatever, things like that that'll make it interesting.
Mhm. Another thing along that line is using bottlenecks
Mm.
and multiple paths to make movement more important. So whether it's the characters who might come up to a bottleneck or the monsters or enemies who might be able to use a bottleneck to get a tactical advantage that can then be overcome with a different path around.
Yeah.
So if there is a hallway where the two fighters can stand and block the way while wizards throw their range spells at the groups, but then to give a secret passage that goes around behind the wizards,
Yeah.
that so the wizards can get a couple of good shots in, but then they realize, oh no,
Love it.
the whatever the hook horrors are now coming out of a secret passage, and I'm the only one that's there uh, to
Yeah.
be beaten on by
Yeah.
these hook horrors. Uh, is it's fun. It's a fun encounter, and it's an interesting map to draw.
Yeah, and you can do a lot to depending on the creatures you have, you can then break the rules with your monsters, right? So I'm thinking of a dwarven forge encounter I wrote for Dungeon of Doom, where there's big, huge bridge spanning a sort of lava place, and the monster, this sort of dragon type creature, can crawl under, over, and even fly. So it now can break the rules that are confining the PCs to certain actions. But what it does is it prefers to be on this bridge, but it can move in and around it, and that makes it very dynamic because you can't just say like, oh, the fighter will be here and tank it, and everybody else hangs back safely. No, right?
Mhm. The next thing I have is add details that matter.
Mm.
So we're drawing an inn tavern room. So we're going to draw the tables, we're going to draw the chairs. If you're going to add something to it, try to make it something that is interesting to interact with. So the table should be something that you can flip and hide behind.
Mm.
The fireplace in the center should be something that you could shove or pull or push creatures into if there's a battle here. Uh, the details can be as fine as you want to make them, depending on if you're going to have an artist do a rendering of this.
Mm-hmm.
But everything that you do should have a reason, either
Mm-hmm.
story wise or world wise or game wise.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, I'm thinking of the D&D tiles that were available in fourth edition were usually very good at the decor. That Jason Engel was the cartographer, and he would make these amazing tiles that would have like a table with stacks of books and beakers and things like that.
Right.
That as you as a designer, as a home DM, whatever, you would think about it and go like, oh, you know, this alchemical
Mhm.
lab. Maybe if someone fail, if you roll and you miss, you might hit something here, and what does that do?
Yep.
And it really spawned a lot of ideas, and you would see this in organized playing adventures at the time that used these tiles heavily. People would come up with so many ideas off of these tiles because the tiles had really neat details. And so you can
Mhm.
do that in either direction. If you use an existing map, draw out and be inspired by that, or conversely ask for it or design it, explain it, that you're doing this, right? This table has this on it. Or as fun as this table has the battle plans for the bad guy. Will
Mhm.
you notice that and take it before
Yeah.
the bad guy takes it or burns it or whatever? And
Right.
that can be really fun, right? The thing where there's a fire on one end and it could reach that thing that you don't want to see burn, right? That's very
Yep.
important. Reach the keg of fire, anything like that, the keg of powder.
Yep. Mhm. Yep. So think about details. This one is interesting to me and it's tough, but it's avoid symmetry.
Mm.
And it's especially for non-artists, I think, or maybe even sometimes for artists. Symmetry is something that our mind gravitates toward.
Yeah.
We draw the room and we have two annexes and they're both equal sized and they both are in the exact same spot. And it's more interesting to interact with a thing that's asymmetrical, that has bumps and has
Mm.
flaws and has crooked regions.
Yeah.
However, however, as a game master, there's nothing more, I won't say frustrating, but strange or game slowing as sitting down to a map and realizing that like there's a river running through the forest and the river cuts through half of a square.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And there's always the question, can I stand here? Can I
Yeah.
stand here? Can I stand here? Can I see what's here if I'm
Yeah.
standing here? Because it doesn't quite match up to the squares of the grid on the map. And
Yeah.
so I always try. even if I'm drawing a wickedly curvy cavern, I try to make it very clear that this is the wall, and while it may not be right on the line, it's close enough to the line that you can tell, no, no one's going to stand here, but yes, you can
That's true.
absolutely stand here.
Yeah, yeah. Clarity of features, both how you fill a square, which is always good. Don't do half squares. But also what a thing is, right? Is this water? Is it
Mhm,
is this a barrel? Is this a crate? Is this elevation? Does this block, right? Is it difficult terrain? Is it blocking terrain? And you can always explain that in the notes, but ideally your map showcases
mhm,
that. If you think about malls, right? If you go into any kind of store, a Macy's, J.C. Penney's, anything like that, the first thing you will do is hit a wall and have to go left or right,
mhm,
right? And they know that you will usually go right. And so that kind of design, you can use that as well, where you will set things up to force
mhm,
characters to split up and move and engage differently. That asymmetry can be part of that as well, right? So there's a tendency, the way you've drawn it up tends to push you towards the right, which is what people want to do, but the rest of the cavern kind of goes towards the left. Now you've got
mhm.
some interesting dynamics as people make choices. And, yeah.
Yeah. And the last thing I had was add surprises. And we've already sort of talked about this. Teos just mentioned like the table with the alchemical
Mm.
components on it that can do great things, can do terrible things depending on how they're interacted with. Secret doors, uh, shelves that can move or be pushed, anything like that, that first the monsters or the NPCs can do, and then the players can also do once they learn
Yeah.
it's there, or if they make the check to make the investigation check to see, becomes very interesting and makes your map something that people want to be on rather than just another thing that's sitting on the table.
Yeah, and those surprises can further reinforce the theme. Going back to Shu's question of key elements communicating a story, when those
Mhm,
elements are surprises that reinforce the mud pit periodically bubbles up and kind of
mhm,
explodes in a shower of hot mud. Or the river has an area that's really fast current and shoves you several squares down. These
mhm,
sands are shifting, and so at the beginning of your end of your round, you have to roll to see if you moved away from where you thought you were ending. Right? Those kinds of
mhm,
surprises absolutely communicate the story of the place, and
yep,
that's really neat. Right? It's a crumbling bank, so maybe it'll crumble under your feet and drag you down 5 squares to the left. There are harsh winds. You can just keep going, right, with
mhm,
ideas that will all reinforce that story of the concept. And similarly, the theme of what you're going on with, right? So, like when I wrote Howling Void, the whole idea is Temple of Air cultists, and air is chaos. So all the things in the rooms tie into those themes of chaos,
mhm.
unpredictability, motion, movement, right? Because that's all tying into that concept and driving that theme.
Yep. Very good. Any parting words for uh, our
Hmm.
talk on making tactical maps?
Yeah, no, I'm not thinking of much. I would just say it's good to periodically look at maps that people draw and think
Mhm.
through how would you would use them, what story they tell, or imagine if you completely like a fun thing to do with a map you do. You start drawing out, flip it 180 degrees,
Mhm.
and if top is bottom of is top, is that better? Or sometimes that can actually shake you up and go like,
Mhm.
oh, this altar is way too far that way. I actually want it
Mhm.
in the middle. Or,
Yeah.
any number of things. And you kind of realize like, oh yeah, like I started drawing it this way, but it's better in this other way. And so changing things around, spinning it, moving where items are can really help you unlock secrets that make it a better play.
There you go. So, all you listeners out there, send us your tips about map making for those of you who have done so, either published or just for your home games, and let us know what we missed. So, Teos, thank you for sharing your wisdom this week. Thank you to all our listeners out there who keep coming back for some reason to hear us pontificate on these news and different game design topics. And we want to especially thank our patrons. We have three levels of patronage out there. We have our Master of Dungeon supporters. Thank you so much for everything that you do for us. Our Master of Realm supporters, y'all know you get a special shout out in our show notes. And to the Masters of the Multiverse patrons, well, you get to hear me mangle your name in real time, starting with Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Dave Bastiensen, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Robo Ballin, Kevin Criswell, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, Will Harshman of Runeforge Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, the Jaunty Mantis TTRPG Podcast, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JL at Tileforge, JR of the Twilight Perspective, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, The Mighty Zeus, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson, the Deck of Player Safety, JT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simosa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunner Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Tres, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, or let me try that again. James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Waziak, Waterford Wizard, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Zowalt Winfrey. Thank you so much. If you would like to help us out, maybe hear your name mangled or get your name in our show notes, you can go to try that again. Going to patreon.com/mastering D&D. If you can't help us through our Patreon, no problem, but you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts to help us out, or just go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@masteringdungeons, and subscribe, because that helps us out and you get to see us in person. So, Teos, where can people find your stuff?
Ooh. Find me at alphastream.org. From there, you can get to my YouTube channel and other places. My most recent video was on how to store minis, and I walked through my gaming room. I give a tour of my gaming room and all the ways that I store minis and terrain and things like that.
Awesome. You can find me on the socials at Sean Merwin. You can follow the podcast on the socials at Mastering DND. So we have instructed the world on how to make tactical maps for their encounters. What are we going to do now?
I think a submerged 5-foot hallway that is 200 feet long, and it's difficult terrain, and then mud can fall down and immobilize you. That would be super fun.
Yeah, I'm going to crawl 30 feet toward my bed and take a nap.